Hello again and welcome to The Diary, the Government Information Agency program that provides a recap of the highlights of the country's president for the week April 18 to 24. In the headlines, the president to join CARICOM heads of state in Trinidad and Tobago for a meeting with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. Former Attorney General Charles Ramson appointed Commissioner of Information. And the president makes another appeal for parliamentarians to collectively address the money laundering legislation. Thank you for joining us. I am your host, Fabian Klaus. Now for the details. The president is slated to join fellow CARICOM heads of state in Trinidad and Tobago for an important meeting with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. Focus will be on trade, economic development, the U.S. State Department country reports, and security cooperation. The forum, scheduled for May 29, is part of a three-nation tour that the U.S. Vice President will be conducting at the end of May. It will also include a visit to Brazil and Colombia. The upcoming forum presents the opportunity for the Ghana government to make known discrepancies it has with the U.S. State Department country reports. At a recent press conference, President Ramottar had questioned the moral authority of the U.S. to lecture other countries, particularly as it relates to human rights issues.
I don't feel that we should be lectured upon. I don't think that anybody got the moral right to lecture upon us, because at the same time when the State Department report came out, in the news there is a whole question about in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where you have prisoners are on hunger strike because of the treatment that they're getting. And we've read so many times about taking people to different countries to waterboarding and all of that. That don't happen in Guyana. That we don't practice those type of things here in our country. And talking about the other part where they talk about press freedom. Well, this man who had WikiLeaks, what's his name? He should be allowed to walk freely too. He's a practical prisoner in the Ecuadorian embassy in London at this point in time. So I think we should all work towards trying to clean up our house and strengthen our systems and make them better, because those who are making those statements, they're no paragon of virtue either.
The most recent report in April offered both praises and criticisms to the Ghana government for its actions and measures implemented in several key areas. In accordance with the Access to Information Act 2011, the head of state has appointed former Attorney General, Justice of Appeal and Senior Counsel Charles Ramson as the Commissioner of Information. Senior Counsel Ramson, as the new Commissioner of Information, has the power to ensure disclosure, to provide access to information if so requires, to publish information and categories of information that are in the possession and control of public authorities. The Commissioner's office would be located at the Office of the President. Under the Act, the Commissioner of Information is authorized to advise how members of the public can access information. Only publicly held companies, public authorities, and entities are covered by the Access to Information Act. The Act stated that the President shall appoint a person of public eminence. Ramson was aptly selected based on the criteria for a candidate who possesses wide knowledge and experience in the law, science and technology, social service, management, journalism, mass media administration, and governance. The Access to Information Act paved the way for the appointment of the Commissioner of Information and for hassle-free access to information under the control of public authorities in order to promote transparency and accountability in the working of government and public authorities. It also imposes the process of how to apply for detailed information, as well as what rights an individual can enjoy as a result of an application. You're watching The Diary. Thanks for tuning in. More features still ahead.
Pensioners are to receive a 25% increase in their pension, or $12,500 monthly, with effect from May 1. Over 42,500 pensioners are to benefit from this increase. Government will also provide each pensioner with assistance of up to $20,000 per annum to pay GPL for their electricity charges. The 2013 budget will bring substantial relief to property owners. Tens of thousands of low and middle income earners with net property value of below $40 million will no longer be subject to property tax. From 2014, the tax-free threshold for property tax on individuals will change from $7.5 million to $40 million.
The Alliance for Change, AFC, and the Partnership for National Unity, APNU, cut $5.2 billion in subsidy to the Guyana Power and Light Company. Implications of this cut: higher electricity tariffs for GPL customers, prolonged periods of blackout, hardships for the manufacturing sector, increased costs for goods and services, halting of expansion projects that cater for increased electricity demand, and loss of jobs for Guyanese.
With the political opposition's clear refusal to support the anti-money laundering legislation, a plea for a collective approach was again made by the President, by way of letter to parliamentarians at the convening of the May 22 sitting. The plea came in light of APNU withholding support to the bill on the grounds that it was kept in the dark and that more time was needed. The Alliance for Change demanded that the Public Procurement Commission be set up, and the President assents to 2 opposition bills. The Parliamentary Select Committee, where the anti-money laundering bill was deferred, has not been moving with urgency ahead of the May 27 deadline and avoid Guyana facing sanctions. The President, in his letter to parliamentarians, said the sanctions would impact on the ordinary people and the country's economy. The country stands the risk of losing international credit worthiness, investors, and face delays in the transfer of funds through commercial banks and money transfer agencies. President Ramotar made reference to the opposition and government in other CARICOM countries working collectively to meet the recommendations established by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force and avert reducing structural legislative and administrative deficiencies in their respective money laundering architecture. He also reminded of the experience of one neighboring country whose status was downgraded twice in the same review process and of the dire impact that the country was faced with. He said that as Guyanese and as political leaders, moral responsibility to support Guyana's compliance with these obligations is much needed. The passage of amendments to the Anti-Money Laundering Act will bring Guyana in compliance with over 90% of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force International Cooperation Review Group recommendations. In wake of a Partnership for National Unity withdrawing much-needed support to the money laundering legislation at a crucial juncture, the head of state has assured the party that it was nothing but an oversight. The coalition party APNU withheld support for the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism legislation at a crucial point, claiming that it was left in the dark about a letter from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force that the President had in his possession. The letter by the task force about the 2009 anti-money laundering architecture had included a request for it to be disseminated to members of the government, the opposition, and all public sector officials. APNU argued that the letter was not shared with them and refused to participate in a meeting convened to discuss the amendments to the legislation. The bill had been deferred to a parliamentary select committee after the opposition argued that its passage was ill-timed. The AFC had announced that it was withholding support to the legislation unless President Ramotar worked towards the establishment of the Public Procurement Commission and assent to 2 pieces of legislation piloted by the opposition last year. Without passage of the legislation that seeks to tighten the law on financial crimes, Guyana could be blacklisted and faced with a suite of measures that could cause the country to lose its international credit worthiness and face scrutiny and delays in the transfer of funds. On April 17, Western nations co-sponsored a financial crimes stakeholders meeting with experts from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force and the Caribbean Criminal Asset Recovery Program. The goal was to establish and/or strengthen an effective anti-money laundering regime that is a prerequisite to political stability, democracy, and transparent commercial trade systems. You're watching The Diary. There's more still ahead.
The Alliance for Change, AFC, and the Partnership for National Unity, APNU, cut $5.2 billion in subsidy to the Guyana Power and Light Company. Implications of this cut: higher electricity tariffs for GPL customers, prolonged periods of blackout, hardships for the manufacturing sector, increased costs for goods and services, halting of expansion projects that cater for increased electricity demand, and loss of jobs for Guyanese.
The 2013 budget will bring substantial relief to property owners. Tens of thousands of low and middle income earners with net property value of below $40 million will no longer be subject to property tax. From 2014, the tax-free threshold for property tax on individuals will change from $7.5 million to $40 million. Pensioners are to receive a 25% increase in their pension, or $12,500 monthly, with effect from May 1. Over 42,500 pensioners are to benefit from this increase. Government will also provide each pensioner with assistance of up to $20,000 per annum to pay GPL for their electricity charges.
In a message to President Barack Obama through the United States Embassy in Guyana, President Donald Ramotar extended sympathy to the American people, particularly residents of Oklahoma City that was ravaged by a tornado on May 20. He said the horrendous toll caused by the tornado that cost lives and devastated homes has struck a chord of sympathy in the hearts of the people of Guyana. The tornado, stretching some 17 miles with wind speeds of up to 210 miles per hour, destroyed hundreds of homes, businesses, schools, and hospitals. The death toll stands at 24, with more than 200 injured. Well, that's all in this week's edition of the Diary for the period April 18 to 24. The headlines before we go: the President to join CARICOM heads in Trinidad for a meeting with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. Former Attorney General Charles Ramson appointed Commissioner of Information, and the President makes another appeal for parliamentarians to collectively address the money laundering legislation. Do join us again next week when we bring you more. I am your host, Fabian Klaus. Thanks for joining us, and do have a safe and pleasant rest of the week.